good to see you here this morning. Thanks for being here. I am glad to be here this morning. Christine and I have been gone a week. My older brother and his wife invited me and Christine and my younger brother and his wife to San Antonio to just have a kind of a brothers weekend. He had a timeshare that he made big enough to fit us all, and off we went. Never been to San Antonio before, and it was nice and warm. It was great. It's just a great time seeing the Alamo, doing the river walk, all the things you do in San Antonio, eating way too much food. It was good. It was great. One day, we're going to one of those San Antonio restaurants, and we decided, the river walk is where all the tourists goes, and all the big, expensive restaurants are there. So we looked for other restaurants, and we like those kind of no-name restaurants better anyway. So we find this place that we're going to go to, and it's in kind of a sketchy part of town, but that's okay. There's power in numbers, right? So we're walking through the streets of San Antonio, and we're getting close to the restaurant, and I'm walking, and there's this woman in front of me. And as she walks by, there's this homeless man on a bench. And the homeless man says something to her, but she just walks. And I said, oh, he's probably asking her for money or something, So I'm walking by, but he doesn't say anything to me. So I just keep going. There's a red light up ahead, so I stop, and I'm waiting for my brothers and wives. And I look back, and my older brother, 6 years older than me, he stops and starts talking to this homeless man. And I said, he is so much better than me, I could have stopped and seen what he wanted, but I didn't. And so then I see my brother bending over, because he's on this park bench, and he's bending over in an awkward way, and he puts his hands under this man's armpits, and he's trying to lift him into his wheelchair. And I noticed that the man didn't have a leg. And I'm thinking, he can't do it because it's an awkward position. He can't do it. And my younger brother is walking up. My younger brother runs to help. And so my older brother is reaching over and over his lap, kind of picking him up. My younger brother goes, no, you got to get behind him. He runs around and picks him up. They move him to the wheelchair. And as I'm watching from probably, 100 feet away, all of a sudden my older brother starts doing these dry heaves, and I'm going, whoa, that man must smell or something, because my brother is. And then my brother starts laughing, and he walks away. My younger brother comes out, and his whole front is covered in poop. Covered in poop. And he's just going, and it's hard not to laugh, right? But, good for him, right, for doing that. Well, right there was a CVS drugstore right there. And he goes into the drugstore, and the lady at the drugstore goes, nope, no public use bathrooms. He's going, ma'am, you see my shirt? I need to wash this shirt. Can you please let me use the bathroom? And she said, okay. So he goes in there, and he scrubs down his shirt, and you try to do the right thing, but often it gets messy. Have you ever noticed that? You try to do the right thing, but often it gets messy. We're in this sermon series called Bloodline. It's exploring Jesus' genealogy. And I tell you, for some reason, God chose the weirdest people and the most corrupt people to be his human ancestors. Why would he do that? Why would he do that? Well, he wants to teach us something, I'm sure. Now, last week, Justin was speaking as I was enjoying the nice warm weather of San Antonio. Justin talked about Abraham and Sarah's son, Isaac. And Isaac had two sons, Esau and Jacob, remember? And there's all kinds of shenanigans about deceiving the father, and Jacob gets the blessing. So Jacob is the bloodline, even though he lied to his father, betrayed his brother. Jacob has 12 sons. Genesis 35, verses 23 and following. Jacob had 12 sons, the sons of Leah. Now remember from last week, Jacob had 2 wives because his father-in-law tricked him, right? So he married Leah, the not-so-attractive wife, and then he had Rachel, the one he loved, and then there's all kinds of other mess that I'm sure Justin explained. These bloodline relatives of Jesus. Wow. Jacob had 12 sons, the sons of Leah, Reuben, the firstborn of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun. The sons of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. The sons of Rachel's maidservant, Bilhah, Dan and Naphtali. The sons of Leah's maidservant, Zilpah, Gad and Asher. Wow. 12 sons from 4 different women. What in the world is happening? Well, I have a little disclaimer for you this morning. This sermon is rated R. So parents, cover your child's eyes. Or close its ears. This is scandalous. This is shocking, the things we're going to read about today. Shocking. And the question is, who is the bloodline? Who is the bloodline? 12 sons. Who is the bloodline? And for some reason, the 4th oldest, Judah, is chosen by God. Why? Take a look at the screen. Why was Judah chosen as the bloodline? Well, the oldest son, Reuben, you can read about him in Genesis 23:22. Is that really the verse? That's what I have. 23:22, Reuben slept with his father's concubine. Could that be why he wasn't the heir? How about the next 2? The 2nd and 3rd oldest, Simeon and Levi, killed the Canaanite tribe of Shechem after they kidnapped and raped their sister Dinah in Genesis 34. Wow. So that leaves Judah? The title today is Judah and Tamar. We're going to read about this guy, Judah, and we're going to see that God chooses imperfect people. And if Reuben was bad and Simeon and Levi were bad, Judah is, I think, 10 times as bad. And yet God chose him to be the bloodline. We're going to dive in. We're going to be in Genesis chapters 38 mostly. And we are going to look at this life of Judah. On the back of your bulletin, there's an outline. Have your Bibles handy. Here we go. Point number 1. Judah. He was a strange choice. What do we know about Judah's character? What do we know about his character? The only way to understand Judah's character is to understand the story of his second to the youngest brother, Joseph. Now, many of you know the story of Joseph. He's the one with the multicolored coat. How in the world was Judah connected to that? Well, Genesis 37. Genesis 37. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending flocks with his brother. He brought their father a bad report about them. 12 sons tending their sheep. Joseph, the second to the youngest, goes and tattletales on the older brothers who are probably messing around while they're watching the sheep and the goats. So the brothers get in trouble. Verse 3. Now Israel, that's Jacob's name, you learned that last week. Israel loved Joseph more than any of the other sons. Why? Jacob loved Joseph the most because he was the first son of the woman he loved, Rachel. So he loved their son together. And he made them a richly ornamented robe for him, a coat of many colors. How'd the brothers respond? Verse 4. When the brothers saw that the father loved him more than any of them, they hated him. Hated him. To make matters worse, Joseph starts having dreams. Joseph had two dreams. The first dream was all these sheaves of grain. They would stand upright for Joseph, but when the brothers came, the sheaves would bow down. And the brothers did not like this. Oh, so you're better than us? He had another dream. The sun, moon, and stars bowed down to Joseph. Now, Joseph could have just kept this to himself. That would have been smart. But no, he went to his brothers. Hey, guess what? I had a dream. You guys are bowing down to me. That didn't go well. So what happened? Well, in verses 12 to 20, Jacob says to Joseph, hey, Joseph, go out to your brothers and see how they're doing. Take some food to them as they're tending the sheep. So Joseph goes out to his brothers. His brothers see him coming and they say, here comes that dreamer. What should we do? Let's get him and let's beat the living tar out of him. Some of them wanted to kill him. Genesis 37, 26 to 27. Here's what Judah does. Judah says to his brothers, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. What does Judah want to do? Judah wants to sell him into slavery. That gets rid of their annoying brother, and they get a little cash on the side. So they do that. They come back to their father and say, oh, Dad, Joseph, look what we found. And they get his all colorful robe and they dump some animal blood on it and rip it up. Is this your son's coat that you gave him? Oh, what a shame, it got ruined. Looks like your son might have been killed by a wild animal. And Jacob is beside himself. They lied to Jacob because their brother is now in slavery, off to Egypt. So how does Judah survive that? I'm sure he's feeling full of guilt. So in chapter 38, verses 1 to 2, here's what Judah does. At that time, Judah left his brothers. Why is that important? Remember, God called Abraham and Sarah to go to this promised land and to create this family. This family that would save the whole world through this family. So what does Judah do? I'm tired of this family. I'm tired of this family. And he leaves and he goes and lives with the pagans, the Canaanites. There he met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her. Judah marries a Canaanite woman, a pagan woman, the daughter of Shua. Judah is saying, I'm tired of doing it your way, God. I am done. And he was gone. And yet God chose him to be the bloodline. Why? Well, point number 2, we're going to learn that he blamed Tamar. And we're going to meet Tamar here in this next verse. Chapter 38, verses 3 to 7. Shua's daughter, that's Shua's daughter, became pregnant and gave birth to a son who was named Judah and his wife now have a son named She conceived again and gave birth to a son and named him Onan. She gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. We're meeting Tamar now. Tamar was arranged to marry the oldest son of Judah. So what happens? But the firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. Now, the Bible doesn't say what did, just that he was wicked, and he dies. Tamar now is a widow. Now, back in that culture, something had to happen. How does God take care of widows? Verse 8. Then Judah said to Onan, son number 2, lie with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as your brother-in-law to produce offspring for your brother. This is where it gets weird. Back in that day, there was this thing called levirate marriage. And here's what levirate marriage is on the screen. It's a legal obligation within Israel where each family would continue to exist and expand in order to protect the widow. How did God take care of the widows? The brother of the widow's husband would have to marry the widow and produce children in his brother's name to continue that family. Here's later on when Moses wrote down the law, here's what it says in Deuteronomy 25. If brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her. The first son she bears shall carry the name of the dead brother. Weird stuff, right? This is weird stuff. Onan has to marry Tamar. That's the way it worked. What did Onan do? Verse 9. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, so he refuses. If you want to read what Onan does, Genesis 38:9. Read about it. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so he put him to death also. Onan now is dead because of he refused to obey and marry his brother's widow. So what happens? Verse 11. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, go live as a widow in your father's house. He's saying, Tamar, you married 2 of my sons. They're both dead. Go back to your father's house. Live as a widow until my son Shelah grows up. For he thought he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's house. Judah is saying, this girl is bad luck. I'm not going to let her marry my youngest son. He's my only son now, Shelah. So she sends her back to live with her father. Now, in that culture, there's no Social Security. There's no pension. If you're a widow and don't have a child, you are hopeless. When her father dies, she will be homeless, destitute, will have nothing. And Tamar is young. She was probably married when she was 15. She's probably moving back to her father's house when she's 17. She has her whole life in front of her, and yet she has to live as a widow the rest of her life because Judah refuses to let her marry the youngest son. So what did Tamar do? Point number 3. Tamar did anything to survive. 38 verse 12. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah recovered from his grief, he went to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep. When Tamar was told, your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear sheep, she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, sat down on the road to Timnah. So what's happening? A long time passes. The youngest son, Shelah, is now of age, could marry Tamar. But Judah's having nothing to do with that. Judah is leaving to go help shear the sheep. Tamar knows her father-in-law. She knows his sinful habits. So what does desperate Tamar do? She takes off her widow's clothes and she dresses up like a prostitute. And she goes and she sits on this road where her father-in-law is going to pass. And she knew his bad habits. She knew that her father-in-law would proposition her. And she's all veiled up so he would never be the wiser. But she was desperate. And why is she doing that? For she saw that, though Sheila had now grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife. Tamar could stay at her father's house. When her father died, she would be a homeless, penniless person in that culture at probably the age of 20. But she took drastic steps. She dresses up like a prostitute, knowing that her father-in-law would proposition her. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, "Come now, let me sleep with you." Wow. Judah is a piece of work. Verse 16 and 17. "And what will you give me to sleep with you?" she asked. He said, "I'll send you a young goat from my flock. Will you give me something as a pledge until you send me this goat?" See, Tamar's thinking ahead. Verse 18. He says, "What pledge should I give you?" He goes, "Give me your seal." You know what a seal is? This is something that wealthy people would have. A seal was something that any kind of documents they would mark, put wax on and mark, and that would show that this is from Judah. She took the seal and its cord and the staff that he had in his hand. So he gave it to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. Wow. Verse 19. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. She's just going to play it cool. What could possibly go wrong, right? Point number 4. I am Judah. I just want to review a little bit about Judah. Judah sells his brother into slavery. He deceives his father Jacob. He moves away from his family, away from God's promises, God's blessing. He marries a pagan woman. He doesn't care for his daughter-in-law Tamar by letting her marry Sheila, the youngest son. He frequents prostitutes. Judah is a piece of work. It's amazing that God chose Judah to be the bloodline. It's amazing. You know, I am just like Judah, though my sins are completely different. My heart is still prone to wander, like that song we just sang. I go my own way. My anger gets away from me. I say things I shouldn't say. And yet God chose me. You see, maybe some of you feel like you're like Judah, or maybe some of you feel like you're like Tamar. God still has a plan for your life. God still offers you a second chance. Never say, God could never forgive me, because God is in the business of forgiving. And as we look at all these relatives, these human relatives of Jesus, we are going to see that these people were some nasty individuals. And if God can forgive them and use them, He can forgive us and use us. So do you want a second chance? Are you tired of living the Judah lifestyle? Are you tired of living the Tamar lifestyle? It's time that we choose to be a child of God. That we choose forgiveness. We choose His amazing grace. His mercy is new every morning. Every morning we get a second chance if we choose God's way. Let's see if we see any kind of change in Judah. Genesis 38, verse 24. About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant." Wouldn't you think that Judah, who frequents prostitutes, don't you think he would have said, "Oh, we got to show grace. We got to show mercy. This is my daughter-in-law. We have to do that." You know what Judah said? "Bring her out and have her burned to death." He's asking for the death penalty for his daughter-in-law. What a double standard. My daughter-in-law is a piece of trash. I am the good guy. He wouldn't even look at himself. Verse 25. And she was being brought out. She sent a message to her father-in-law. She's being dragged out to be burned to death. And she sends a message. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these," she said. And she added, "See if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are." And you know what Judah could have done? Judah could have gone, "I don't know what that is. Someone stole that stuff from me. It must have been her." I mean, he could have just denied it and had her burned to death, and his secret would have been forever hidden. But guess what? Verse 26. Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I." Notice Judah didn't say she's righteous, because she's not. He said, "She is more righteous than I." Because Judah refused to give his son Shelah to her. To me, that's the first step of Judah's change. Verse 27. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. She has twins, and one of her sons, named Perez, he becomes the bloodline. He becomes the bloodline. So what of Judah? Well, remember when we started this whole thing, we had to understand the story of Joseph, right? We had to understand that story, right? Well, guess what? Joseph was sold into slavery, and he actually went to Egypt. And God blessed Joseph. You know the story. Joseph becomes the number 2 in power of the whole country. And there's this big famine, and Jacob tells his sons, "Go to Egypt and bring back food. But don't bring my youngest son, Benjamin. I already lost my one son from my favorite wife, Rachel. I'm not going to lose Benjamin." So they go off, and Joseph, who's dressed up like a pharaoh, says, "I'll give you lots of food, but you got to bring your youngest son." They go back home and tell the dad, "Dad, we need to bring Benjamin, or he's not giving us the food we need." And he lets Benjamin go. And Joseph does some trick that makes Benjamin look like he stole this golden cup. And he's going to keep Benjamin as a slave. And look what happens, Genesis 44:18. Then Judah went up to him, Joseph, the guy pretending to be Pharaoh's number 2, and says, "Please, my lord, let your servant speak a word to my lord. Do not be angry with your servant, though you are equal to Pharaoh himself." Verse 33. "Now then, please let your servant remain here as the Lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return to his brothers." See what Judah's doing? Judah is offering his life for Benjamin. And I tell you something. People who are selfish, egotistical, they don't do that. Judah is beginning to change. and he offers himself to be a slave of Pharaoh instead of Benjamin. Well, Joseph ends up revealing his identity. All of Jacob and his family comes and lives in Egypt, and that is great for a while, and we'll figure out what happens that next week. But here's what Father Jacob has to say about Judah. This is our last verse, 49 verse 8. He says, Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. Verse 10. The scepter will not depart from Judah. Judah is going to be the bloodline. Nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until he comes to whom it belongs, until Jesus comes. And the obedience of the nations is his. Judah has a turnaround. Was he perfect? I doubt it. But he gets his father's blessing. Not because he was perfect. Not because he didn't do some horrible mistakes. He did. But God has a plan and a purpose for the family line of Judah. And Jesus, known as the Lion of Judah, is going to come from that line to save the world. God has a plan and a purpose for every single person in this room. Doesn't matter if you're young or you're old, God has a purpose for you. Quit being distracted like Judah. And seek God. Follow him step by step. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for the story. The story of Judah, the story of Tamar. How lost they were, and yet you found them. So God, as we get lost, find us. Forgive our sins. Help us to seek you with our whole heart.